Amelia Carter had walked into some strange rooms in her life, but never had she walked into a private dinner filled with dangerous men, only to discover that the most feared man at the table was pulling out a chair for her. And the worst part, she hadn't even been looking for him. She had been looking for a camera battery. That was it. A tiny piece of equipment worth less than the shoes she was wearing, and somehow, that ridiculous little battery had led her straight into the one room at the Moretti estate she had been warned not to enter. Amelia stood in the doorway, frozen. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her camera bag. The enormous dining room stretched before her, beneath golden chandeliers and flickering candlelight. A long, polished table ran almost the entire length of the room. Crystal glasses, white roses, silver cutlery, half-finished plates. Dark wine. Men in black suits sitting on both sides of the table, and at the head, Luca Moretti. Amelia's stomach dropped. She knew exactly who he was. Everyone did. Luca Moretti didn't need an introduction. He was the kind of man whose name could lower a conversation by several volumes. The kind of man who could enter a crowded room without saying a word, and somehow make everyone remember their manners. Tonight, however, he wasn't looking at anyone else. He was looking directly at her. Amelia's brain immediately began searching for an explanation. Maybe this wasn't his dining room. Maybe she had somehow entered the wrong wing. Maybe there was another Luca Moretti. That last thought was ridiculous. There was no way there were two men in the city with that expression. The men around the table had also stopped moving. One man lowered his glass. Another slowly leaned back. Someone at the far end of the table glanced toward the door, then toward Luca. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Amelia suddenly became very aware of herself. Her floral dress, her camera hanging against her hip, the loose strand of hair that had escaped her carefully pinned hairstyle. And, most embarrassingly, the tiny camera battery she was holding between two fingers like evidence from a crime scene. She looked at it, then at the room, then back at the battery. For one ridiculous second, she considered pretending she had walked into the wrong room because she was lost. But that would have raised another problem. She wasn't lost. She had simply been curious, which, Amelia was beginning to realize, was occasionally a very expensive personality trait. She had been hired to photograph the charity event taking place downstairs. The ballroom had been full of wealthy guests, expensive gowns, champagne towers, and enough perfume to make her feel like she had accidentally inhaled a department store. She had spent hours taking photographs, smiling, moving, adjusting lighting, fixing angles, politely asking people to stand closer together, politely asking other people to stop standing so close together, and repeatedly reminding one particular guest that the centerpiece was not a souvenir. By the end of the evening, Amelia's feet hurt, her shoulders hurt, her patients had packed a suitcase and left without saying goodbye. Then she realized her spare camera battery was missing. She had checked her bag twice, then 3 times, then every table, then the ballroom, then the terrace, then the kitchen, and eventually, she had followed a quiet hallway because she had seen a faint line of warm light beneath a pair of enormous wooden doors. She thought it might be a service room, or storage, or another part of the event space. She hadn't expected this. Now, she was standing inside a room where nobody looked remotely interested in charity. The atmosphere was too still, too controlled. There was something beneath the expensive dinner. Something Amelia didn't understand, something that made the men around the table look less like guests and more like people waiting for a verdict. Luca remained seated. His white shirt was open slightly at the collar. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms. One hand rested against the arm of his chair. The other remained near his untouched glass. He didn't look surprised to see Amelia. That was the first thing that bothered her. He looked interested, as though her appearance had interrupted something important, but not necessarily something unwelcome. Amelia swallowed. She slowly lifted the camera battery. This is what I was looking for." Her voice sounded painfully small in the enormous room. Nobody laughed. Of course, nobody laughed. This was not the type of room where people laughed because someone had made an awkward joke. Amelia wished she could rewind the last 30 seconds. She could practically hear her own conscience screaming, "Turn around, walk away, do not ask questions." She should have listened. Instead, she took one small step backward, then another. Luca's gaze followed her, still calm, still unreadable. Then his hand moved, not toward a weapon, not toward his phone, not toward any of the men surrounding the table. He reached toward the chair beside him, and slowly, deliberately, pulled it out. The chair scraped softly against the marble floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Amelia stared. Her eyes moved from the chair to Luca, then back to the chair. Was he serious? Surely not. Maybe he was simply moving it. Maybe someone else was supposed to sit there. Maybe this was some strange Mafia version of interior decorating. Then Luca looked at her. His expression barely changed. "Come in." Amelia didn't move. The room remained silent. One of the men looked irritated. Another looked confused. A third looked almost amused. Amelia suddenly realized something. Nobody else at that table had been invited to sit beside Luca. And now, the cold Mafia boss had personally pulled out a chair for her. She looked over her shoulder. The hallway behind her suddenly looked like the safest place on earth. But Luca was still watching her. Not impatiently, not angrily, almost curiously. Amelia took a breath. She stepped inside, one foot, then the other. The door remained open behind her. She could still leave. That thought comforted her. For approximately 3 seconds. Then one of the men at the table shifted. His hand disappeared beneath his jacket. Amelia noticed. Her heart skipped. Luca noticed her noticing. His eyes moved toward the man's hand, a tiny movement. Barely visible, but it was enough. The man's hand immediately returned to the table. Amelia's breathing slowed. Okay, so this was definitely not dinner. Not normal dinner, anyway. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody was discussing dessert. Nobody was complaining about the weather. They were waiting. For something, or someone. And somehow, Amelia had just walked directly into it. She reached the chair. She hesitated. Luca watched her. The room watched her. Amelia slowly sat. The chair was absurdly comfortable. That almost annoyed her. She had expected something terrifying. Instead, she was sitting in a chair that felt like it cost more than her first car. She placed her camera bag beside her feet. The men returned their attention to Luca. Amelia kept her hands in her lap. She told herself not to look around. So naturally, she looked around. One man had a scar near his eyebrow. Another had a watch that looked expensive enough to pay her rent for several years. A third kept glancing toward Luca. None of them looked happy that she was there. Luca noticed every glance. He said nothing. That silence was somehow worse than shouting. Amelia slowly realized something else. There were 11 places around the table, 12 including Luca's. Only 10 men were seated. The chair beside Luca had been empty, waiting. But for whom? Her? No, impossible. She had simply stumbled into the room. Unless Luca had expected someone else. That thought sent another chill through her. What if the person who was supposed to sit beside him hadn't arrived? What if she had accidentally taken their place? What if... Luca's voice interrupted her thoughts. Your name. Amelia looked at him. She already knew he knew. Her name had been on the event list. Her credentials had been checked at the entrance. He had probably known who she was before she ever stepped into the room. Still, she answered. Amelia Carter. Luca held her gaze. Something flickered across his face. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Amelia noticed. And suddenly, she wasn't sure whether walking into the room had been an accident anymore. She glanced down at the camera battery in her hand. That tiny piece of equipment had brought her here. But perhaps someone had wanted her here. The thought had barely formed when Luca reached toward the table. He picked up a glass of water, placed it in front of Amelia. A simple gesture, almost polite. But his eyes remained fixed on her. Amelia looked at the glass, then at him. The gesture should have made her feel safer. Instead, it made her more nervous. Because Luca Moretti didn't strike her as a man who did anything without a reason. He didn't pull out chairs accidentally. He didn't invite strangers into private meetings, and he certainly didn't place drinks in front of people unless he knew exactly why they were sitting there. Amelia slowly reached for the glass, then stopped. Something felt wrong. She looked toward Luca. He gave the smallest nod. Only then did she take it. She didn't drink. Neither did he. Across the table, one of the men cleared his throat. Luca didn't look at him. The man stopped. Amelia's curiosity began fighting with her survival instincts. Curiosity was winning. It always did. She glanced at the papers scattered near the center of the table. Numbers, names, financial figures, company logos. Several documents had been folded. One sheet had a photograph partially visible beneath it. Amelia couldn't see the entire image, only a familiar face. Her breath caught. She leaned forward slightly. Her father's face stared back at her. Amelia froze. The room suddenly disappeared around her. The candles, the men, the chandeliers, Luca, everything blurred. Because that photograph was of her father. A photograph she had never seen before. And it was sitting in front of the Mafia boss, who had just invited her to his private dinner. Amelia's fingers tightened around the glass. Her father had been dead for years. He had never mentioned Luca Moretti, never mentioned the Moretti organization, never mentioned this estate, never mentioned any of these men. Yet his photograph was sitting on Luca's table. Why? Her heart began pounding. She looked at Luca. His expression had changed. The faint amusement was gone. Now he was watching her carefully, as though he had just realized something himself. Amelia's eyes returned to the photograph, then to the papers, then to the men around the table. One of them had gone pale. Another looked away. That was when Amelia understood. This wasn't about her walking into the wrong room. It wasn't about a missing camera battery. And it wasn't even about the private dinner. Something had happened before she arrived. Something involving her father. Something involving Luca. And possibly someone at this table. Luca slowly reached across the table and turned the photograph face down. Too late. Amelia had already seen it. His eyes met hers. For the first time that night, the cold Mafia boss looked genuinely concerned. Not for himself. For her. Amelia opened her mouth. She wanted to ask what her father had to do with him. But before she could, a sharp sound came from somewhere behind the dining room doors. Everyone at the table turned. Luca's posture changed instantly. The relaxed man disappeared. The room seemed to become colder. His hand moved beneath the table. Every man around him reacted at once. Amelia sat completely still. The sound came again. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Nobody spoke. Luca stared at the doors. Then one of the men whispered something. Luca raised one finger. Silence. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know who was outside. She didn't know why everyone was suddenly tense. She didn't know why her father's photograph had been sitting on this table. And she definitely didn't know why Luca Moretti had pulled out a chair for her. But she was beginning to understand one thing. She hadn't simply walked into a private dinner. She had walked into the middle of something dangerous. And whatever had been waiting for Luca Moretti tonight had just discovered something it hadn't planned for. Amelia Carter was sitting beside him, the woman who wasn't supposed to be there, the woman who had found a photograph she was never supposed to see, the woman who had unknowingly stepped into a secret tied to her father's past. Luca slowly turned his head toward her. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Whatever happens next, stay beside me." Amelia stared at him, then at the closed doors. Another shadow moved beneath them. Someone was standing outside, waiting. And suddenly, the empty chair beside Luca Moretti didn't look like an invitation anymore. It looked like the safest seat in the entire room. Because whoever had come through those doors hadn't come for dinner. They had come for Luca. And now, they might have come for her too. The shadow beneath the dining room doors didn't move. Not for several seconds. Amelia remained seated beside Luca, her fingers wrapped tightly around the untouched glass of water. Every instinct told her to stand. Every reasonable thought told her to leave. Unfortunately, nothing about the situation was reasonable anymore. She had entered a private room by mistake. She had discovered a photograph of her dead father. She had been seated beside a Mafia boss, surrounded by men who looked like they had never once lost an argument. And now someone was standing outside the door. Amelia glanced toward Luca. He hadn't moved. His expression was completely controlled, but she noticed the small details, the way his shoulders had stiffened, the way his eyes had narrowed, the way his fingers rested near the edge of the table. Luca Moretti wasn't frightened. He was calculating. That somehow made Amelia more nervous, because frightened people sometimes made mistakes. Men like Luca apparently didn't. One of the men closest to the door slowly rose. Luca lifted a hand. The man stopped. No words, just one gesture, and the entire room obeyed. Amelia swallowed. She had spent the entire evening watching Luca command a ballroom without raising his voice. Now she understood why. Power wasn't always loud. Sometimes, power was a man sitting perfectly still, while everyone else waited for him to decide what happened next. The shadow beneath the door disappeared. Amelia's eyes widened. Whoever had been standing outside had moved. The room remained silent. Then, 3 more knocks. This time, slower, more deliberate. Luca finally stood. Amelia instinctively reached for his sleeve. She didn't even realize she'd done it until his eyes dropped to her hand. She immediately released him. Sorry. Luca's expression barely changed, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. Amelia wished he wouldn't look amused. This was not the time. She had just discovered her dead father's photograph in a Mafia meeting. She was allowed to be slightly nervous. Luca moved toward the door. 2 men positioned themselves behind him. Another moved toward the side entrance. Amelia remained seated. She was beginning to feel like the only person in the room who hadn't received the instruction manual. Then Luca stopped. He looked back at her. His eyes briefly moved toward the chair beside him. The meaning was obvious. Stay. Amelia nodded. She wasn't sure whether she was obeying him or simply too curious to leave. Probably both. Luca opened the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No movement. Only the warm glow of the wall lamps. One of Luca's men stepped into the hallway and looked both ways. Nothing. Luca's jaw tightened. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small black envelope. He crouched, picked it up. Amelia watched from across the room. Luca turned it over. There was no name, no address, nothing. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. He looked at it. For the first time that night, his expression actually changed. Amelia couldn't see the photograph from where she sat, but she knew immediately that whatever was on it wasn't good. Luca folded it, placed it inside his jacket, then closed the door. He returned to the table. Amelia stared at him. He sat down. She waited. He said nothing. She waited longer. Still nothing. Finally, her patience snapped. I'm going to assume that wasn't a dinner invitation. One of the men looked at her. Another almost smiled. Luca simply poured himself water. Amelia stared at him. You're really good at pretending nothing strange is happening. His eyes lifted. I've had practice. That answer somehow made everything worse. Amelia leaned back. She glanced toward the photograph lying face down on the table. Her father's face was still burned into her mind. She hadn't seen that particular photograph before, but she knew him. She knew the way he smiled, She knew the small crease beside his left eye. She knew the watch on his wrist. And she knew the man standing beside him. She didn't know him, but Luca clearly did. Amelia looked at the photograph again, then at Luca. "Why do you have a picture of my father?" The room became silent. Luca didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the other men. Something passed silently between them. Amelia noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a photographer. Her entire career depended on noticing things people thought were too small to matter. And right now, everything mattered. Luca finally reached for the photograph. He turned it over. He studied it for a moment, then placed it in front of Amelia. Her breath caught. It was her father, standing beside a younger Luca, much younger, perhaps 15 years earlier. Amelia looked between them. Her father was smiling. Luca wasn't. That part hadn't changed, but there was something else. A third person stood behind them. His face had been partially cut out of the photograph. Amelia frowned. "Who is that?" Luca didn't answer. He took the photograph back. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "You know." "Yes. And you're not going to tell me." "Not yet." She stared at him. That answer irritated her. That's a very convenient phrase. Luca's eyebrow lifted. Which phrase? "Not yet." A tiny smile appeared. "You'll hear it often." Amelia almost laughed. Almost. Then she remembered where she was. The laughter disappeared. Luca leaned back. His attention moved toward the men around the table. The dinner resumed, but Amelia could feel the difference. Nobody was eating now. The plates had become irrelevant. This wasn't a dinner. It was an investigation. And somehow, she was sitting in the middle of it. One of the men finally began explaining why they had gathered. Money had disappeared from several companies controlled by the Moretti organization. Not millions in one obvious transfer. Smaller amounts, different accounts, different businesses, different dates, designed to look insignificant. But when combined, the missing money was substantial. Amelia listened. She didn't understand the criminal side of the operation, but she understood numbers, she understood patterns, and she understood something about photographs that most people didn't. The smallest detail could reveal the entire story. The same applied here. She glanced toward the documents. Several dates, several account numbers, several names. Then something caught her eye. A date. She knew it. Her father's death had occurred 3 days after that transaction. Amelia's stomach tightened. She leaned closer. Luca noticed. "What?" She pointed. "That date." He looked down. She swallowed. "My father died. 3 days after that." Silence. Luca's face became unreadable. Amelia felt the air leave the room. She had spent years believing her father's death was an accident. A late-night drive, wet roads, a mechanical failure, a tragedy. At least, that's what she had been told. Now his photograph was sitting inside Luca Moretti's private dinner, beside financial records connected to his organization, and a date 3 days before her father's death. Amelia looked at Luca. "What happened 3 days after that?" Luca didn't answer, because one of the men at the table suddenly pushed his chair backward, hard. Everyone turned. He stood. His face was pale. Luca's eyes narrowed. The man looked toward the door, then toward Amelia, and that was the moment Amelia realized someone at this table knew exactly who her father was. And they were terrified that she had just connected the dates. The man didn't leave. He couldn't. 2 guards were already positioned between him and the door. But he kept staring at Amelia. Not angrily, not suspiciously, fearfully. That was worse. Amelia slowly turned toward Luca. He was watching the man now. There was no amusement left in his expression. Only calculation. The man eventually sat down. The chair scraped against the floor. Nobody spoke. Amelia's curiosity was becoming almost painful. She wanted answers. She wanted them now. But something told her Luca wasn't going to give them easily. And that was exactly what happened. He gathered the documents, one by one, carefully, then placed them into a leather folder. Amelia watched. You're leaving? No. Then why are you packing everything? Luca looked at her. Because this conversation is over. Amelia stared. She almost laughed. The man had just essentially told her that her dead father's name had appeared in a secret Mafia meeting, and now he was ending the meeting. She folded her arms. That's convenient. Luca paused, then looked at her. Very. That dry answer caught her completely off guard. Despite herself, she smiled, just slightly. One of the men at the table looked between them, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The coldest man in the room was casually bantering with the woman who had accidentally interrupted his secret meeting. Amelia noticed that too. She lowered her voice. You're strangely calm. Luca leaned back. I'm rarely anything else. That's concerning. Why? Because normal people panic occasionally. Luca's mouth twitched. I'm not normal. Amelia almost said, I noticed. Instead, she looked back at the photograph. Her father, young Luca. The unidentified man, and that missing section. Something bothered her. She picked up the photograph. Luca watched her. Amelia turned it over. Nothing. She held it closer to the light. Still nothing. Then she noticed a faint crease. Not random. Intentional. She ran her fingertip across it. There. Luca leaned forward. Amelia pointed toward the lower corner. A tiny mark. Almost invisible. 3 numbers. 7, 14, 3. Luca's expression changed. He knew the numbers. That much was obvious. Amelia looked at him. What does that mean? Luca took the photograph. He studied the mark. His thumb brushed across it. Then he looked toward one of his men. The man's face had gone pale again. Amelia noticed. And now, she was certain. The numbers meant something. Something connected to her father. Luca stood. The room immediately became tense. He looked toward the man who had reacted. Leave. The man didn't move. Luca repeated himself. Now. The man stood. 2 guards escorted him away. Amelia watched the door close behind them. She turned toward Luca. What was that? Luca remained silent. She sighed. I'm beginning to think your favorite word is later. This time, he actually smiled. Barely. But she saw it. And strangely, that made her more nervous than his anger. Because the more Amelia saw the man beneath the reputation, the harder it became to remember that Luca Moretti was supposed to be dangerous. He was still dangerous. She knew that. But around her, there were moments when his guard slipped. Small moments, almost invisible, and Amelia was beginning to wonder whether he realized it. Luca eventually returned to the table. He placed the photograph in front of her. Your father worked for my family. Amelia froze. What? Not directly. Luca explained that her father had once been hired as an independent financial auditor. He had investigated several companies. He discovered irregularities, money moving through shell companies, accounts being manipulated, payments disappearing. At first, he believed it was ordinary financial corruption. Then he realized someone inside the Moretti organization was involved. He began documenting everything. Until he died. Amelia's eyes burned. She looked down. All those years, she had wondered whether her father had simply been unlucky. Now there was another possibility. He had discovered something dangerous. And somebody had wanted him silent. Luca didn't tell her that he was certain her father's death had been murder. Not yet. He wasn't going to give her a conclusion without proof. But Amelia could read between the lines. She sat quietly. For once, there was no joke, no sarcasm, no clever remark, just grief. Luca watched her. He didn't touch her, didn't offer empty comfort. He simply remained there. That somehow meant more. After several minutes, Amelia finally spoke. Why didn't anyone tell me? Luca's answer was quiet. Because someone wanted you to believe your father died without leaving anything behind. She looked at him, but he did. Yes. What? Luca looked at the photograph. Evidence. Amelia's heart began beating faster. Where? Luca didn't answer, because suddenly, a phone vibrated. Not his. Amelia looked around. Everyone checked their phones. Nothing. Then her own phone vibrated inside her camera bag. Amelia froze. She slowly reached for it. One message. Unknown number. No greeting. No explanation. Just a photograph. She opened it. Her blood ran cold. It was a photograph of her, standing outside the Moretti estate earlier that evening, taken from across the road. Someone had been watching her. Beneath the photograph were 7 words. You should never have entered that room. Amelia stared at the screen. Luca noticed her expression. He held out his hand. She passed him the phone. He read the message. His face became completely still. Then, the phone vibrated again. Another photograph. This one was older. Much older. It showed Amelia as a child, standing beside her father, at the marina. She stared. Her fingers trembled. That photograph had never been public. Nobody outside her family should have had it. Luca looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. Someone wasn't merely watching Amelia now. Someone knew her history. Someone had been watching her for years. Then a final message appeared. He hid something from you. Amelia stared at the words. Luca looked at her. Don't respond. She nodded. But her mind was already racing. Her father had hidden something. What? And why had someone waited all these years to reveal it? Then Amelia remembered the camera battery, the one she had been searching for. She reached into her camera bag, pulled it out, turned it over. Something was different. There was a tiny scratch along the side. She hadn't noticed it before. She pressed the battery casing. It opened. Inside was a micro SD card. Amelia stared. Luca stared. Neither spoke. Someone had placed it there. And Amelia suddenly understood why she had been led into that hallway, why the door had been left open, why the photograph had been waiting, why someone had wanted her to enter this room. The entire night had been arranged. She hadn't accidentally discovered Luca Moretti's secret dinner. Someone had guided her to it. And now, they were waiting to see what she would discover next. The memory card sat between them, tiny, almost meaningless, yet somehow it felt heavier than the entire room. Luca picked it up. He didn't insert it into a computer. He didn't examine it immediately. Instead, he looked at Amelia. That surprised her. Why are you looking at me? Because whoever planted this knew you'd find it. Amelia frowned. So? So they wanted you to open it. She understood. It wasn't evidence merely being hidden. It was evidence being delivered. A trap disguised as a discovery. Luca handed the card to one of his men. Check it. The man left. Amelia watched him disappear, then looked toward Luca. Do you think my father knew this would happen? No. You sound certain. I knew your father. That stopped her. You did. Luca nodded. Briefly. Amelia stared. The photograph had already changed everything, but hearing those words made it more real. You knew him? Yes. And you never thought to tell me? Luca's expression softened slightly. You never asked. Amelia stared at him. I didn't know I was supposed to ask whether the Mafia boss knew my father. A tiny smile touched his mouth. That would have been unusual. Exactly. For a moment, the tension cracked. Amelia laughed softly. Luca almost smiled again. Then the man returned. He placed a laptop on the table. The memory card was inserted. One folder appeared. No title, no date, just a single word. Moretti. Luca stared at it. Amelia leaned closer. The folder contained dozens of files, financial documents, photographs, scanned pages, audio recordings, and one video. The date on the video was almost 20 years old. Luca clicked it. The screen showed a younger version of Amelia's father. He was sitting inside the same marina office Amelia remembered from childhood. Her throat tightened. Her father looked directly into the camera. He looked tired, serious, afraid. Amelia's hands began trembling. Her father spoke. not to her. To whoever might eventually find the recording, he explained that he had discovered a financial network operating inside several legitimate companies. Someone had been stealing from the Moretti organization, but the theft wasn't the real objective. The money was being used to build something else, a hidden organization, one designed to eventually overthrow Luca's family from within. Amelia listened. Every word felt like another piece of her childhood being rewritten. Her father mentioned several names. One of them belonged to a man still sitting at Luca's table. Amelia looked at Luca. He didn't react. Not outwardly. But his eyes had become colder. The recording continued. Then came the part that changed everything. Her father said he had hidden the original evidence somewhere nobody would ever think to search. Not in a bank. Not in a safe. Not with the Moretti organization. Somewhere connected to the only person he trusted completely. His daughter, Amelia. She stopped breathing. Luca looked at her. The recording continued. Her father mentioned a phrase Amelia remembered from childhood, a ridiculous phrase her father used whenever they went boating. 714-3. Amelia's eyes widened. The numbers on the photograph. 714-3. She suddenly understood. It wasn't a code. It was a location. Her father's old marina had numbered storage units. 7, 14, 3. The evidence was hidden there, and whoever had planted the memory card knew Amelia was the only person capable of understanding the clue. But there was something else. Something far more disturbing. The video ended with her father looking directly into the camera. His expression changed. He leaned closer and said something that made Amelia's blood run cold. The recording stopped. Silence. Amelia stared at the black screen. Luca remained beside her. Nobody spoke. Then Amelia finally whispered, "My father knew he was going to die." Luca didn't contradict her. That was answer enough. She looked toward him. "And he left the evidence for me." "Yes, but why?" Luca's eyes met hers. "Because he trusted you." Amelia swallowed. For years. She had believed her father had left her nothing except memories. Now she understood. He had left her a mission. And that mission had just placed her directly in the middle of Luca Moretti's most dangerous enemy. The room became tense again. One of Luca's men entered quickly. He leaned toward Luca. Whispered. Luca's face hardened. Amelia watched. "What?" Luca looked at her. "The man who left the room earlier is gone." Amelia's stomach dropped. "How?" Security cameras were disabled. The room went silent. Luca stood. He walked toward the window. Outside, the estate grounds looked perfectly peaceful, beautiful, quiet, almost harmless. But Luca knew better. Amelia watched him, then noticed something through the glass. A vehicle, parked beyond the gates. No headlights. Engine running. She pointed. There. Luca turned. The vehicle moved, slowly, then disappeared into the darkness. Luca's security team rushed toward the entrance. Amelia stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. Luca immediately turned toward her. "Stay here." Amelia folded her arms. "You know that's not going to happen." He stared at her. She stared back. For the first time, Luca looked almost frustrated. Not because she was disobeying, because he knew she was right. Amelia had already become part of this. There was no pretending otherwise. She had the photographs. She had the memory card. She knew about her father. And now, someone knew she knew. Luca stepped toward her. His voice became low. "From this moment forward, you don't go anywhere alone." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "That sounds less like protection and more like imprisonment." "It's protection. You're very controlling." "Yes." The bluntness caught her off guard. She almost smiled. Almost. Then Luca reached for her camera bag. Amelia instinctively held onto it. His eyes dropped to her hand. She slowly released it. He examined the bag. Nothing. Then he looked at her. "You're coming with me." "Where?" "To the marina." Amelia's heart jumped. The old marina. Her father's marina. the place where the evidence had been hidden. Luca walked toward the door. Amelia followed, but as she reached the hallway, she stopped. Something had been placed on the floor outside the dining room, a small white envelope. Her name was written across it, Amelia Carter. She stared. Luca saw it. His entire demeanor changed. He picked it up, opened it. Inside was a single photograph, not of her father, not of Luca, not of the marina. It was a photograph of Amelia sitting beside Luca at the dinner table, taken only minutes earlier. Someone had been inside the estate, watching them. The photograph had been taken from somewhere inside the dining room itself. On the back, there were 4 words: "She is the key." Amelia looked at Luca. The coldness returned to his face, but beneath it, there was something else: protectiveness, fury, and a decision. He folded the photograph, placed it inside his jacket, then looked directly at Amelia. The woman who had entered his private dinner by accident was no longer an accident. She was at the center of the entire conspiracy. And somewhere inside the Moretti organization, there was a traitor who had been waiting years for her to return. Luca reached for the door. Amelia followed. Neither of them noticed the tiny camera hidden above the hallway chandelier. Its red light blinked once, then went dark, because whoever was watching them had just learned something very important. Luca Moretti was no longer investigating the conspiracy alone. He had chosen to protect Amelia Carter, and that meant the next move would not be against Luca. It would be against her. The drive to the old marina began in silence, not the comfortable kind of silence Amelia had experienced earlier at the dinner table. This was different, heavy, watchful. The kind of silence that made every passing headlight feel suspicious. Amelia sat in the passenger seat of Luca's black SUV, her camera bag resting against her feet. 2 vehicles followed behind them. Another traveled several car lengths ahead. Luca had not explained the arrangement. He didn't need to. Amelia had spent enough time around him to understand that when 4 security vehicles suddenly appeared around you, something had gone very wrong. She looked through the window. The city lights slowly disappeared. Buildings became smaller, then fewer. Soon there were only dark stretches of road, trees, and the occasional farmhouse hidden behind gates. Amelia glanced at Luca. He was driving himself. That surprised her. She had expected a driver. Then again, she was beginning to realize that Luca Moretti did a lot of things differently from what she expected. He drove with one hand on the steering wheel. His expression was focused. His other hand rested near the center console. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Amelia finally looked down at her shoes. She noticed a small smear of dust across one of them. She sighed. This has officially become the strangest photography assignment I've ever had. Luca's eyes remained on the road. You're still thinking about work? I've been thinking about work since 5 this morning. A pause. That's unfortunate. She looked at him. Was that sympathy? No. Right. She looked back out the window. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Amelia's eyes drifted toward the dashboard. A small clock showed 12:38 a.m. She thought about the dining room, the photograph, the memory card, her father's face on that old recording. She still couldn't fully process it. Her father had known he was in danger. He had hidden evidence. He had apparently trusted her to find it someday. And now, someone had photographed her sitting beside Luca only minutes after she'd entered that room. Someone had been watching. Inside the estate. That was the part Amelia couldn't stop thinking about. The camera. The hidden camera above the chandelier. The photograph. The envelope. Everything pointed to someone who had access to Luca's private spaces. Someone who understood his security. Someone who knew exactly when Amelia would arrive. And someone who knew enough about her father to understand the importance of the number 7-14-3. Amelia looked at Luca again. You're sure the marina is safe? No, she blinked. That answer had come too quickly. That's reassuring. Luca glanced at her. I didn't say it was unsafe. You literally just said you weren't sure. I said I didn't know. That's basically the same thing. A faint smile touched his mouth. It disappeared almost immediately. But Amelia noticed. She was beginning to suspect that making Luca Moretti smile was becoming one of her strangest hobbies. The SUV continued through the darkness. Then Luca's phone vibrated. He glanced at it. A message from his security chief. The vehicle ahead had spotted movement near the marina entrance. Luca's expression hardened. He slowed. Amelia noticed immediately. What happened? Someone may already be there. Her stomach tightened. The old marina was supposed to be abandoned. If someone was there, they were either looking for the evidence or waiting for them. Luca's security team moved ahead. The convoy stopped nearly half a mile from the property. Luca turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. One of his men approached the driver's window. A brief exchange followed. Then the man stepped back. Luca looked at Amelia. We walk from here. Amelia glanced down at her heels, then at him. You're joking. No. She stared at him. I wore these for a charity gala. I noticed, and now you're asking me to walk through a dark forest in them. You can take them off. Amelia looked at the muddy ground. Absolutely not. Luca almost smiled. Almost. Then he opened the door. Amelia sighed. Of course. She stepped out. The night air was colder than she expected. Ahead, the old marina waited in darkness. The wooden sign was barely visible through the trees. Hayes Marina. Amelia stopped. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen that sign in years. The paint was faded. The letters were cracked. But she knew every inch of it. Her father's place. Her childhood. The dock where she'd learned to swim. The little office where she'd done homework while her father repaired engines. The old storage buildings where she'd spent countless summers. She suddenly wasn't Amelia the photographer anymore. She was 12 again, running across the dock with wet hair, while her father shouted that she was going to slip. She almost smiled. Then the memory hurt, because her father wasn't there. Luca noticed her expression. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply slowed his pace. That small gesture meant more than a question would have. They reached the old gate. It was unlocked. Amelia stopped. Her father had always locked it. Always. Even when they were inside. She looked at Luca. He noticed too. One of his men checked the gate. Fresh marks around the lock. Someone had opened it recently. Luca's expression hardened. They entered. The marina was silent. No lights, no movement. But something was wrong. Amelia knew it immediately. She could feel it. Her father had kept the place organized. Even after the marina closed, he had labeled everything. Storage sheds, boat slips, tools. Nothing had ever been left randomly. Now, several objects had been moved. Amelia walked toward the old office. The door was open. She stopped. Luca moved in front of her. He entered first. The office was almost exactly as she remembered it. A wooden desk, old shelves, a faded calendar, a broken radio, her father's old chair. Amelia stepped inside. Her eyes burned. On the wall was a photograph. Her father, her mother, Amelia as a child. She touched the frame. Dust covered her fingertip. Then she noticed something. The frame wasn't dusty behind the photograph. Someone had recently moved it. Amelia looked at Luca. He understood immediately. They removed the frame. Behind it, a small metal box was embedded in the wall. Amelia's heart raced. Luca opened it. Inside was nothing. Empty. Someone had gotten there first. Amelia stared. The evidence was gone. But then, she noticed a thin strip of paper stuck beneath the metal box. She pulled it free. 3 words. Not here. Try 3. Amelia frowned. Then remembered the number. 7. 14. 3. Storage Unit 3. She looked toward Luca. He nodded. They moved toward the storage sheds. But before they reached them, a light flashed in the distance. Once. Twice. Then disappeared. Luca immediately raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Amelia's heart began pounding. Someone was moving between the buildings. Luca looked toward the darkness. His men spread out. Then, a door slammed. Someone ran. 2 guards chased after the figure. Amelia stood beside Luca. They heard footsteps, then silence. A minute later, the guards returned, empty-handed, but one of them held something, a black glove. Luca took it, examined it, then looked toward Amelia. She stared at the glove. There was something stitched into the wrist, a small silver emblem. She recognized it. She had seen the same emblem earlier that evening, on the cuff of one of the men at Luca's dinner. Amelia's eyes widened. The traitor wasn't simply connected to the conspiracy. He had been at the dinner, and he knew exactly where they were going. Storage Unit 3 stood at the far end of the marina. The lock had been replaced. Amelia remembered the original, a rusty brass padlock her father had complained about for years. This one was new, too new. Luca examined it, then stepped aside. One of his men opened the lock. The door creaked. Dust filled the air. Amelia covered her nose. Inside were old boating supplies, broken chairs, fishing equipment, and several cardboard boxes. Nothing looked valuable. Nothing looked important. Then, Amelia noticed a wooden workbench. Her father had built it himself. She walked toward it. Her fingers brushed across the surface. There were scratches, old ones. Some formed strange patterns. She remembered watching her father work there. He had always tapped his fingers against the wood whenever he was thinking. Tap, tap, pause, tap. 3 times. Amelia stared. Something clicked in her memory. Her father had taught her a little game when she was a child. Whenever he needed her attention, he would tap 3 times on the workbench. She had always laughed and called it his secret code. Now, she tapped the wood. 3 times. Nothing happened. She frowned, then remembered another detail. Her father had always said, "Don't force the drawer." Amelia looked down. There was an old drawer beneath the workbench. She pulled it. It didn't move. She stopped. Luca watched her. She examined the drawer. There was no handle, just a tiny indentation. She pressed it. The drawer released. Inside was a key, a small brass key, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper. Amelia opened it, her father's handwriting. Her hands trembled. The note contained only one sentence. "If you found this, Amelia, trust the man who brought you here." She stared at the words, then slowly looked toward Luca. He was watching her. For perhaps the first time, Luca Moretti looked genuinely uncomfortable, not because of the note, because of what it meant. Her father had known about him, had trusted him, had expected him to protect Amelia. She handed him the paper. Luca read it. His jaw tightened. Amelia's voice softened. "You knew. I knew your father was investigating something. You knew he was afraid." "Yes, and you never told me." "I couldn't." She stared at him. "Why?" Luca looked away. "Because the people responsible were still inside my organization." The answer settled heavily. He had suspected for years, but suspicion wasn't proof. Her father had died before he could expose the truth, and Luca had spent years searching for whoever had betrayed him. Now, Amelia had brought the missing piece directly into his hands. The brass key fit a small cabinet at the back of the storage unit. Luca opened it. Inside was a metal case. This time, it wasn't empty. Documents, photographs, bank records, names, dates, transfers, and one small notebook. Amelia recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's. She picked it up. The first pages contained notes about financial transactions. The later pages contained names. One name appeared repeatedly: Marco Bellini. Amelia remembered him, the man from the dinner, the man who had looked terrified when her father's name was mentioned, the man whose cuff carried the same silver emblem as the glove. Amelia's breathing changed. Luca saw the name. His face became unreadable. Marco had been beside him for almost a decade, trusted with information, trusted with money, trusted with security. And now, his name was inside her father's notebook. Luca turned several pages. There were dates, meetings, payments, descriptions of conversations. One entry was dated 3 days before Amelia's father died. The writing was hurried, almost unreadable, but one sentence stood out. Marco knows. Amelia looked at Luca. He killed my father. Luca didn't answer immediately. Then, no. She frowned. What? He may have been involved. Amelia's eyes hardened. But you're not sure. I don't accuse men without proof. She almost laughed. You're a mafia boss. I still prefer evidence, despite the circumstances. That made her smile. A very small smile, Luca noticed. So you can laugh. Amelia looked at him. You're not allowed to use my own words against me. Apparently I am. The moment passed quickly, because one of Luca's men entered. He held up a phone. A message had arrived. From Marco. He wanted to speak privately with Luca. Luca stared at the screen. The timing was too perfect. Amelia immediately understood. He knows. Yes. He knows we're here. Yes. Then this is a trap. Luca looked at her. Probably. Amelia sighed. Your life really does make ordinary problems look impressive. That earned the faintest smile. But Luca's eyes remained cold. He made a decision. They would return to the estate, but not through the main route. He wanted Marco to believe they were still searching the marina. They left the storage unit with the notebook. Before they reached the vehicles, Amelia stopped. Something had caught her eye. Across the water, a small boat, motionless. No lights. Someone was sitting inside, watching. Luca followed her gaze. His expression hardened. The boat suddenly turned. Its engine roared. It sped away. One of Luca's men ran toward the dock. Too late. Amelia looked at Luca. Was that him? Maybe. But you looked like you recognized the boat. Luca didn't answer. He walked back toward the vehicle. Amelia followed. Inside the SUV, he finally explained. The boat belonged to Marco, and Marco was supposed to have sold it 6 months earlier. He hadn't. He had kept it. That meant Marco had access to the lake, access to the marina, access to Luca's movements, and possibly access to the estate's security systems. The conspiracy was no longer theoretical. The traitor was close, very close. As they drove back, Amelia looked at the notebook again. A loose page had fallen from between the covers. She picked it up. There was a list of names. 4 people. 3 had already died. 1 remained. At the bottom, her father had written a single line. The 4th man will come for Amelia. Amelia's blood ran cold. She looked at Luca. He saw the page. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Luca took the page from her. His expression became frighteningly calm. Then he made one mistake. Amelia looked at him. What? Luca folded the paper. He told us what he plans to do. By the time they returned to the Moretti estate, the atmosphere had changed. The ballroom was empty. The chandeliers were dimmed. The staff had been dismissed. The estate felt enormous, almost unnaturally quiet. Luca ordered the security team to lock down the property. Every entrance, every camera, every vehicle, every communication channel. Amelia watched from the hallway. She had never seen the estate like this. The elegant charity venue from earlier was gone. Now it felt like a fortress. Luca walked into his office. Amelia followed. He didn't ask her to. She simply did. The notebook lay open on his desk. The names were spread across the surface. The evidence had finally connected the past to the present. Marco had been involved, but he wasn't working alone. There were financial records proving someone else had funded him. Someone with access to the Moretti organization's private accounts. Someone who had been quietly preparing to remove Luca from power. The missing money wasn't being stolen for personal wealth. It was being used to buy loyalty. Drivers, security personnel, business partners, officials, people inside Luca's organization had been recruited one by one. The betrayal was much larger than anyone had realized, and Amelia's father had discovered it before anyone else. That's why he had died. Luca stared at the documents. Amelia stood across from him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Amelia noticed something. One of the photographs from the memory card had been printed. It showed Luca at the charity event, standing near the ballroom entrance. But behind him, almost hidden in the reflection of a mirror, was Marco. And beside Marco was another man. Amelia recognized him. The man who had left the dining table earlier. The man who had been frightened when her father's name was mentioned. She pointed. "There's your second man." Luca looked. His expression hardened. The traitor wasn't running. He was still inside the estate. Luca immediately understood. The man hadn't fled. He had remained close because he knew exactly where the evidence was, and he knew Amelia had it. Suddenly, the lights went out. Again, Amelia froze, the same darkness from the dining room. But this time, Luca was ready. Emergency lights came on within seconds. Security teams moved through the halls. Nothing. No attack. No intruder. Then Luca's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Nobody spoke. A video appeared on the screen. Luca watched. His face changed. Amelia moved closer. The video showed the old marina. Someone had returned. Marco. He was standing inside the storage unit, holding a copy of the notebook. He had found the empty cabinet. He knew they had taken the original. Then he turned toward the camera, and behind him stood the second traitor, the man from the dinner. The video ended. A message appeared. "Come alone." Luca's jaw tightened. Amelia knew immediately what he was thinking. "No." He looked at her. "I didn't say anything. You were thinking it. I wasn't." "You absolutely were." He almost smiled. Almost. Then the phone vibrated again. Another message. "Or she dies." The humor disappeared. Luca's eyes became ice. Amelia knew exactly what he was going to do. He would go, alone, because that was what men like Luca Moretti did when someone threatened the person beside them. Amelia stepped closer. "You're not going without me." Luca's expression hardened. "No." She folded her arms. "You need me. I need you alive. And you need the person who knows what the numbers mean." Silence. She had him. Luca hated it. She could tell. But he also knew she was right. The evidence couldn't be fully understood without her father's notes, and Marco had specifically demanded her presence. This was the final move. They returned to the marina, but Luca had no intention of walking into the trap unprepared. His men surrounded the area from a distance. Amelia stayed beside him. The old storage unit stood open. Darkness inside. Luca entered first. Amelia followed. No one was there. Then, a light flickered. Marco appeared at the far end of the building. He looked tired, older than Amelia remembered. The confidence he had carried at the dinner was gone. Beside him stood the second traitor, the man who had been watching her. He held the original notebook. Amelia's heart tightened. Luca stepped forward. The confrontation was quiet. No shouting, no dramatic threats, just the slow unraveling of years of betrayal. Marco admitted that Amelia's father had discovered the financial network. He had tried to silence him, but he hadn't acted alone. The second man had provided access to the Moretti security system. Together, they had manipulated accounts, planted evidence, and waited for the right moment to remove Luca. Then Amelia's arrival ruined everything. Her father's hidden evidence had resurfaced. The numbers had led her back to the marina. And Luca had become suspicious. Marco's mistake had been assuming Amelia was helpless because she didn't belong to their world. That assumption had cost him everything. Amelia stepped forward. She looked at the notebook, then at Marco. Her father's death had haunted her for years. Now she finally knew the truth. It didn't make the grief disappear, but it gave it a shape, a reason, a name. Luca moved between Amelia and the men. His presence alone changed the room. The traitors were arrested. The evidence was secured. The conspiracy collapsed. But the story didn't end there, because after the danger was gone, Amelia returned to the dining room, the same room where everything had started. The candles had been relit, the table had been cleared, the chairs remained exactly where they had been. She stood in the doorway. Luca was already there. He was sitting at the head of the table. He looked at her. Then he reached for the same chair, pulled it out. Amelia smiled. Again? Luca's expression softened. You seem to like that chair. She walked toward him. I think you just like pulling it out. He shook his head. No. Amelia stopped beside the chair. Then why? Luca looked at her. For once. There was no mystery in his eyes, no calculation, no guarded expression, just honesty. Because I want you here. Amelia's heart skipped. She sat. The same chair, the same table. But everything felt different. She looked around. The men were gone. The secrets were exposed. Her father's name had finally been cleared. And the woman who had accidentally walked into the wrong room was now sitting exactly where Luca wanted her, beside him. Amelia looked at the empty plate in front of her. So, Luca waited. Is this actually dinner this time? A faint smile appeared. Yes. No secret meeting? No. No traitors hiding behind the curtains? No. No one planning to kill anybody? Luca paused. Amelia narrowed her eyes. Luca. His mouth twitched. Not tonight. She laughed. The sound echoed through the enormous dining room, and Luca watched her. Not like he had watched her at the charity event. Not like he had watched her when she first entered the private dinner. Not like he had watched her when he suspected she might be connected to the conspiracy. He watched her like a man who had finally found something he hadn't known he was missing. Peace, warmth. Someone who didn't fear him. Someone who could walk into his most private room by accident, sit beside him, and somehow make the entire dangerous world outside disappear. Amelia reached for the glass in front of her. Luca poured the wine. She looked at him. You know, he raised an eyebrow. I still never found my camera battery. Luca stared at her. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out the tiny battery, and placed it on the table. Amelia's eyes widened. You had it. Yes, you had it. The whole time. I found it before you entered the room. She stared at him. You could have given it to me. I could have. Why didn't you? Luca leaned back. The smallest smile appeared. You wouldn't have walked into the dining room. Amelia stared at him, then burst out laughing. You set me up. I didn't. You absolutely did. I left the door open. That is literally setting someone up. He didn't deny it. Amelia shook her head. You're unbelievable. So I've been told. She reached across the table and took the battery, then looked at him. You know what the worst part is? What? I probably would have walked in anyway. Luca smiled. I know. The room became quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't dangerous. It was comfortable. Amelia looked toward the chair beside her, then toward Luca. She realized something. That chair had started as a trap. Then it became protection, then trust. And now, it felt like home. Outside, the Moretti estate settled into the quiet of the early morning. The danger was gone. The secrets were exposed. The past had finally stopped chasing them, and inside the dining room, Luca Moretti sat beside the woman who had accidentally walked into his private dinner. The woman who had uncovered the betrayal everyone else had missed. The woman who had carried her father's secret for years without knowing it. And the woman who had somehow managed to make the most feared man in the room laugh. Amelia lifted her glass. To accidental invitations. Luca lifted his. To you walking through the wrong door. She smiled. And to the empty chair. Luca looked at her. His voice was quiet. It won't be empty again. And this time, Amelia didn't need to ask what he meant. She already knew. Because the woman who had accidentally walked into Luca Moretti's private dinner hadn't simply found the truth about her father's past. She had found the man who intended to stand beside her for whatever came next.